Hello, this is our presentation on the political culture in Japan. I'm Kaley Niette. I hope you enjoy it, and let's go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Cho, and as we have already mentioned in the first slide, we are going to be talking about Japan's political culture. To introduce a little bit of our project, today we're going to be mainly talking about three different topics today. Our first topic being the discussion of Japan's political culture and their impact on Japanese society and their economics and the Japanese industry. The second topic that we're talking about today will be the discussion of how Japanese political culture influenced growth, expansion, and the development of Japan. And our third and final topic today will be us drawing connections between two different current events that we've pulled and how they have influenced Japanese political culture. Overall, in the whole entire project, we're mainly going to be pulling lots of events and different policies that Japan has improved or have tried to improve, and how those events and those policies have affected the whole entire country and the political culture.
So, in the last several decades, Japan has undergone a great deal of change, going as far back as World War II, and then various political and social upheavals as well. Of course, economic problems, both at the end of the 20th century and the last 10 to 15 years of this one, has led to rising inequality, right? Increased poverty, a wage gap, wealth gap. All of these things have led to um, decreasing stability. So Japan, a country that prizes its ability to maintain this quality of life, not give up its culture or institutions, despite the world growing smaller around it, the world becoming increasingly interlocked. This is very discouraging for the Japanese government and the ability of the Japanese people to trust it. And of course, some of these problems have been exacerbated by corruption or inaction in the government, which is, basically instead of sweeping reforms that could have perhaps tackled some of these economic problems right away, the reforms were done piece by piece and are still ongoing. So they have been really slow to take effect or, be beneficial to the Japanese people, which means that they have developed a sort of sense of distrust of government or politics simply because it is not working to serve them in the short term, which is, completely sensible. Uh, Japanese culture also heavily relies on collectivism in society. So, as the new generation, as young people get older, there's sort of a sense of traditional values versus the times changing, right? Larger cities and young people have been found to be less reliant on this collectivist attitude, which means that there's even more change, right? So this is a period of great change, especially for older people and people who are more set in their ways, uh, in this sense, right? Another thing that's changing is that women are slowly breaking down barriers. Women are still severely underrepresented in many aspects of political and social life in Japan, but this is changing. Some of this can be attributed to the maintenance of gender roles, but again, this is slowly being changed, which any improvement is great improvement. So some of the political changes that we talked about on the last slide, and that includes, economic policy and other changes, have been made out of sort of a real need, right? So not necessarily something that is wanted, something that it's time to do, to get started on, but we're running out of time to do it, so we have to sort of take it on now. This mentality is really related to this stability versus instability aspect of life in Japan. Um, there's real value in keeping things the same, keeping things homogenous, especially in a small country where this idea of a national identity is so important to their culture. Um, the only issue is that, like, with the immigration policy reform example, um, there's been sort of a push until it's absolutely time to bring in more people to participate in the workforce, to actually do that, right? So they need workers now, and they are now running out of young people to move into the workforce to care for the aging population. But now that this is starting to cause problems, is when sort of real action's being taken to do something about it, if that makes sense. So, um, this is a really uh, concerning issue simply because as time goes on and there's more and more problems, stability is being prioritized over making, difficult changes, but changes that will ensure the longevity of the ability to remain stable. Another really important element of political culture in Japan is the imperial family. Despite the monarch largely being a figurehead, and the actions of the royal family being governed by um, the appropriate government agency, um, they are still sort of an example of Japanese culture, not only in Japan, but to the world. So the imperial family is part of diplomatic efforts, part of national efforts, um, and really represents this aspect of culture, um, is part of Japan's national identity, right? It is uniquely Japanese, this structure and system. Um, and in a world where everything is changing and the world is getting smaller and smaller, right? It's important for a lot of people to have that, um, just representation of their culture, um, and of their values in this way. So it's a really important aspect, um, of culture and a part of their political culture as well, but also is uh, positive and useful in that, um, this is someone who can represent Japan not only, from being elected, but from um, being part of this unique system. And it's someone who has, at least the current emperor, taken it upon himself and his family to rebuild diplomatic relationships and make amends for um, historical violence or colonialism, um, so that Japan can have positive relationships with other countries that perhaps previously they did not.
So, on this slide today, we'll be talking about Japan's economics. As many of you know, after World War II, the Japanese economy was in devastation, and their main focus shifted on reconstruction and finding stability. Now, one of the factors that the Japanese made use of was their characteristic to expand the economy was to improve and make practical use of technologies and the low cost of technologies. Now, the Japanese were among the best at doing such a thing. So they focused on creating a new technology, such as the low-cost mass production systems, which is now how Japan is known for its rapid rate of economic growth in the 20th century. Now, Japan also focused on expanding their industry and focused on market development. So, mainly what I mean by that is that they focused on creating a highly diverse manufacturing and service economy, which is why the largest producers of motor vehicles, steel, and consumer electronics all come from Japan itself. Now, on top of that, the Japan also chose to focus on moving Japanese companies to produce overseas to appreciate the value of yen. And lastly, the Korean War demanded a huge amount of Japanese goods that helped economic activity. So not only did they use current events that were happening during the time but they also focused on influencing the low-cost mass production systems by combining like numerous technologies imported from all types of foreign countries, which is now how why the rapid rate of economic growth occurred. So on this slide today, we're going to be talking about Japan's industry. So Japan's main leadership in politics that chooses to speak for the people are known as the all-powerful. As in the Meiji Constitution time, the nation focused on creating a united nation that would withstand pressures from the West. Now, with Japan's government being a parliamentary democracy, developing a consensus leadership in many areas of life, coming from being the president of a company, leader of a political party, head of a group, this all emphasizes their need to build around a group's leader. Being so used to having voted for one person to lead all, to take information from all to take to the higher table. Many Japanese corporations and industry leaders also take an active part in such activities of the main organization. The consensus leadership permits for more long-term development of the Japanese economy, which basically means being able to create such a government that mainly focuses on the consensus leadership. They're able to provide for everyone in the end, as if even when they need to lay off employees, they're still able to protect the people who are in need of income the most, overall helping the whole entire economy still choose to prosper. So on this slide today, we'll be talking about a political culture example that we wanted to provide of Japan's democratic renewal of their closing the country. So as many know, due to COVID-19, Japan closed their borders in order to protect the lives of their citizens. This time was very similar to Sakoku, which basically means a closed country. Sakoku was a period of 250 years that ended in the mid-19th century of closing their borders off to foreigners. So closing the border allowed Japan to not only manage the number of infected cases under about 300,000, I believe, but although lives were being saved, the industry was losing the usual amounts of consumers and losing money overall, as Japan was once known as traveler's paradise. So borders were eventually reopened to welcome the Go To Travel campaign to explain the new normal lifestyle they developed from the pandemic. So, which basically means there was more mask mandations. Many foreigners had to come under strict regulations such as quarantining for 2 weeks, only traveling into certain areas that were open, always having a mask on, and just respecting the overall campaign and the lifestyle they developed.
So two of the last things we wanted to touch on were obviously that the changes that we've discussed in this presentation and what we've learned about Japan um, throughout this class is what we know now, right? Japan is going through a period of really significant change, really significant development, even as, there are problems with the economy worldwide, even as um, there are political and social changes happening around the world. Um, we cannot, um, you know, predict in this presentation or perhaps even um, in the world, how that's going to go, especially given the amount of um, current global events happening, right? We're recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic still. And people are continuing to get sick from coronavirus variants. There's a war going on between Ukraine and Russia, right? There's a lot happening in the world. And these are observations made in this presentation and by um, scholars and diplomats around the world. And we can only see what the future looks like for Japan as it plays out. So we hope you enjoyed our presentation and we thank you for watching it. We hope we taught you something valuable about Japan's political culture and its impacts.